Hi everyone. I am thrilled today to present to you my dear friend and author of this amazing book, Operation Kids Safe, Kristi McVee. Kristi, thank you so much for agreeing to talk with me today. You can see how much I love your book because I've got all of these tags on it.
Thanks, Holly.
Detective's Guide to Child Abuse Prevention. Kristi, tell us why you wrote your book.
Well, I wrote the book because, just to get into it a little bit, so I was a police officer with the West Australian Police for 10 years, a specialist child interviewer for 9 years, and a detective for just under 6, which led me to specialise in child sexual abuse. So when I was in the police, I was constantly dealing with the repercussions of what happens. You know, police come in after the fact, after everything that has happened. And as a police officer and as a parent, because I have a now 15-year-old daughter, but whilst I was in the police, she was between 2 and 12. I just felt like we just always came in at the end, and it was just so heartbreaking to have these these little people and these teenagers and these people coming in, and their worlds were turned upside down by child sexual abuse. And there's not so much police can do. Yes, they come in and they lock up the bad guy and they hopefully put them in jail, in a perfect world, or not so perfect world either. But there's so many repercussions and so much trauma created through the cycle of child sexual abuse. So whilst I was a police officer, I just kept thinking, if parents knew what I knew, they would do things so much differently, because even as a parent of a 2-year-old, when I first joined the police, I had no idea about some of the stuff that I write about in my book. I had no idea until I started working as a police officer, as a specialist child interviewer, and I was introduced to that world. And then I was realizing that, wow, I had no idea, and I was not prepared. I'm just so grateful that I joined when I did, when my daughter was 2, and that I had that knowledge, because I can't imagine, I was actually thinking about this the other day, I can't imagine what her childhood would have been like, how much different it would have been if I hadn't have become a police officer when I did. So I was leaving the police after 10 years. I actually ended up with post-traumatic stress disorder and anxiety from all of the stuff I was seeing and hearing, because unfortunately, every time you listen to someone's ordeal or what trauma and what they've gone through, it leaves little pieces in your own soul. So through vicarious trauma, I actually ended up with PTSD and decided to retire. Actually, my daughter was the one who told me to asked me to leave the police. It was sad. It was very sad for her and for me, and for I wish I could have continued, but at the same time, I think I'm on the better side of it now, which is in prevention. So I left the police, but as I was leaving the police, I thought, I need everyone to know what I know. So I started writing my book. It started off as an idea that wouldn't go away. I know that you probably feel the same way with your books, Holly, and it just wouldn't go away. And so I just kept writing until 2 years later, I had this book, which is everything I know.
Look how thick it is.
I probably could have spared some words, but it's my heart and soul in there. So,
And what I love about it is your whole story. You talk about your childhood, you talk about joining the police force, you talk about, your PTSD, but also you give so many gold nuggets of protective education and, what parents need to know. So it's just an all-round beautiful book.
Thank you.
It's not just about, and what I also love about it, because I know you, it's like hearing you talk. It's, it's not jargon, it's not, it's just so practical.
Yep.
And, it's for everybody. People say, you need to niche down and you're not for everybody. But I believe this book is, because I think police officers will get a lot out of it. I think because a lot of them don't know protective education like you did. Parents definitely need to have it, because there are just so many, as you can see, for those of you on the podcast, there's a lot of tags, a lot of yellow tags on my book. You mentioned, you said hopefully go to jail. A lot of people think, you know, if a child does come forward, then everybody goes to jail. But you know, do we actually know the statistics of how many cases actually go all the way through? And we also know that a lot of people don't actually even disclose.
Yeah. I don't know the statistic. I have heard the statistic on a Sunday morning. This is hard work to say that. Yeah, I have heard the statistic, but it's something abysmal, like down around 10% or something like that. It's not much. But don't quote me on that, but I do know it's very low. And not to mention, and you know this too, you know, the average age of someone coming forward for the first time and telling their story for the first time about their child's sexual abuse experience is around 24 to 30 years, depending on whether they're female or male. So it's very low. So a child coming forward or a parent coming forward and saying, I think, you know, my child's been sexually abused, you know, police do everything in their power that they can. But a lot of instances, because of how insidious in nature child sexual abuse is, you know, there's no witnesses, there's no evidence, there's nothing to corroborate or support a child's disclosure to police. Doesn't mean that police can't give it a go and try, you know, but a lot of cases, and this is what got me it was actually quite traumatizing for me as a police officer and heartbreaking for me, is that, you know, a lot of cases end up being written off insufficient evidence, or a lot of cases will go as far as court, but then the Department of Public Prosecution, who is in charge of trialling these types of cases, you know, they're the ones that do it instead of police prosecutors, because it's the next level up. It will go to district court instead of just magistrates court. So, you know, the DPP, if they don't believe there's enough evidence, they will then write it off, because the level of evidence, the level of belief that you have to have in it is beyond a reasonable doubt. So there's no doubt in a jury's mind, 12 people, 12 random strangers who sit in a courtroom, they have to have no doubt in their mind that someone's done something to find them guilty. And that's really hard to do. But it doesn't mean that, you know, police don't give things a go. It just means that it can often end with a very traumatic process. The court process, you know, from reporting to court can be very traumatic for the victim and the family, because it's not just once you go, there's lots of like in between parts, and, you know, defense attorneys and all of this stuff. Yeah, it's just a very traumatic process. And then by the time that as someone gets to court, it can be quite traumatic, that whole process in itself. So it's, you know, it's just, yeah, it's one of the reasons why I left the police, because I couldn't deal with how much trauma was created in that process as well.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I've just spent the last week in 2 ed support schools, so children with special needs, and we know they're up to 7 times more likely to be abused than mainstream children. And so I spent a lot of time, because, you know, many of the children are non-verbal. So I spent time with the teachers showing them how to, on their communication devices, have, you know, strategies for them to be able to disclose, because you know, in my experience, the DPP are less likely to go ahead, because they'll say, oh, you know, they don't make good witnesses. And so I explained to the teachers, you need to have this in the child's IEP, the individual learning plan. So you can say, I've been teaching this for, you know, 7 years, and if they said it happened, then it jolly well happened. One of the children, I was talking about consent, and I said, oh, can I give you a kiss? And I leaned in and he went to kiss me. And so the teachers have gone, oh, you know, we thought we taught him consent, but on his device he had no. But when he pressed it, it was just no. I said, no,
not allowed no.
We need to have a polite no, a manners no, and then an emergency no, and things like that, because we can still set up, you know, even though children have difficulty explaining it, we can still set up processes for them. I'm sure you'll remember the case that we had a few years ago, where there was that young 20-year-old young woman who was sexually abused by a taxi driver.
Yeah.
And she had just enough language to let her carers know. And then when they went through the vision on his camera, he'd raped 2 other women as well. And so, you know, that he did get convicted because there was video evidence.
Yes,
but
which is very rare.
Exactly. You've
Yep.
just said that, you know, it is only one person's word against the other. And then children don't have the language. And
Yep.
so, you know, that's why your book is so good, because, you know, like me, you talk about it's the importance of teaching protective education and giving children the language.
Yeah. Yeah, because one of the things that I saw time and time again so part of my job as a specialist child interviewer is when a child discloses their abuse to someone and then it gets referred on to police, I would then be the person who sat down across a table from the child and get their evidence for court. It was video recorded, it was just me and the child in the room. And it's done in a special way that ensures that the evidence isn't contaminated with any sort of, because like you were saying about children, they don't have the language a lot of the time, and they also want to please adults. You know, in a lot of cases, they just want to make everyone around them happy. That's children's nature. And so if we don't do it, if we don't interview a child with the right language and, you know, which is open-ended questions, allowing them to lead the disclosure without adding anything to it or giving them suggestions, because that's what adults do. We try and help them. So that was my job, was to just sit across the table from children, hearing what they had to say. And if people, sometimes I wish people knew what I'd heard, because they would take such greater care with children, and there would be there would be a lot more compassion towards children, because our children, whether they've been victims of child sexual abuse or physical abuse or mental abuse or whatever abuse that they've been a victim of, sitting across from them and hearing their words and hearing their disclosures, a lot of the time they blame themselves. They think that they're the ones in the wrong, and they are just heartbroken that they've hurt someone, that they've done a lot of the time they take on the blame of that they've told someone, because that all they wanted it was to stop, and now the police are involved, and and they're going to get that person in trouble, and and children are just so special, and they're so resilient, and they just want to make everyone happy. So it's no wonder. And so sitting across from all these kids over the years, I just realized that as adults, as parents, we take them for granted. We take their words for granted. So, it is really hard for, like, 1 in 3 Australians, so this was a statistic, and this statistic as well, Holly, 1 in 3 adult Australians will believe a child when they disclose child sexual abuse to them. So only 1 in 3. So if a child goes to the 2 out of 3 people that don't believe children when they say that something's going on, then, if that's the first person they speak to, we now teach perseverance. Don't you teach it too? We teach kids now. I teach kids, you teach kids, that they have to, if the person they go to doesn't do anything, to go to another adult. And if that person doesn't do anything, to go to another adult. We have to teach kids this, because the many victims that we've spoken to and the many survivors that I've spoken to have told people in the past, been pushed aside and told that they were making it up, or, just completely ignored. And that creates its own level of trauma. So, that hurts more when they go to a safe adult, or who they think is a safe adult, and they get ignored, than sometimes the actual abuse and what happened to them. And so, yeah, part of my reason for writing the book was I just want to educate parents on how much they can do, because I think a lot of parents and carers, they just don't know what to do. They don't know how to help, so they do nothing. It's quite a human nature thing, isn't it? You just stop, you freeze, you do nothing instead of doing something. Whereas I think that, I don't know, maybe I'm just a little bit different, because I like to chase things down every rabbit hole. I was one of the most annoying detectives to my team, because I would get a case and I wouldn't let it go until I'd found every rabbit.
Persistence. We teach persistence. We teach it to children, and you were persistent.
I was very persistent, very, very persistent. It got me in a lot of trouble. But so I think the thing is that as adults, we need to have more faith in children, and also something that's been running through my mind a lot lately is that I write about my own childhood in my book about, I didn't have child sexual abuse, but there was physical and psychological abuse. I was kicked out of home at 15. I come from, drug and alcohol abuse, some substance abuse background. But, I had a choice when I had my daughter to change that narrative. I had a choice to make, and I've done my best. I haven't always done it right, but I've done my best to change that narrative and be the best parent I could be, because I didn't want to do that to my own daughter. I didn't want her to grow up feeling as that she wasn't enough and she wasn't worthy. Now, I know, and we know from that recent study that came out, Holly, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're estimating around 40% of all Australians have had some form of child sexual abuse, or 50%, something like that. It was massive.
Yeah.
Massive number.
And still, that's an estimation, but it's still an estimation. One child is too many.
I know.
But, usually people underestimate, because, it depends on people's. I did a podcast with Shannon Malloy, and in that interview we were talking about some statistics as well. Most people don't disclose, and I was fortunate enough to spend some time with Professor Frida Briggs before she passed away, and she was saying that she believes that boys are more sexually abused than girls. Boys are just less likely to talk to us. But what she also said was, when she was interviewing predators in jail, that she would say to them, "Have you been sexually abused?" And "Oh, don't be ridiculous. No, I was never sexually abused." But she then turned it and said, "Tell me about your first your first sexual experience."
Yeah.
And then they've, oh shit, excuse my language. Yeah, I was sexually abused. They didn't realize it. And, Shannon talks in his story about, he was abused by another child, but he's still grappling with, well, was I abused? He spent years in therapy. He talks very openly in our podcast about he's still trying to get his head around, he was 5 and the child was 9. So, and for boys, it's even more confusing, because they get an erection. So they think, oh, I must have liked it. And then, in our interview, we talk about also how people grapple with it. Are they gay because they got an erection?
Yeah.
And so it's so complex, but it's the whole gamut. So I believe 100% of children will be sexually abused because of pornography. It's not a case of if kids see it, as you know, it's when kids see it. That is abuse. Being exposed at a bus stop by somebody is, somebody flashes them. That's abuse. Yep. So it depends on, you were dealing with the big end of town, the really heinous stuff. But still, if a child was exposed at a bus stop, every time they go past that bus stop, they're going to be reliving it and have their early warning signs going, is it going to happen again? Is it going to happen again? Yeah. So, I think if everybody looks back to their childhood, there'll be something that, yeah, that maybe that wasn't supposed to happen. Yeah. So I really think, we know the big stuff, the stuff you were having to deal with, we know that mostly happens by people that, 90% is by somebody that's known to the child. Yeah. But it's this, especially the children exhibiting harmful sexual behavior, that I think we need to talk about as well.
Yeah. And I agree with you. And that's the other thing. So after years of dealing with, the after effects, the after fact, it's happened. Now let's try and clean this up and make it make sense for them, for the family and the child, which police, the whole process doesn't do very well of. It's not like once they're put in jail, then you get to move on with your life in a happy, way. It doesn't happen like that. But when I left the police, all I could think of is prevention. We need to focus on prevention. There is preventative measures we can take. There is protective behaviors and protective education. And I also, I don't judge any family parent or anyone, but us as parents, because I'm a parent as well, we are letting our kids down by first of all, not educating ourselves, not talking to our children and educating them, and not realizing that because of the internet and online and social media and pornography and everything, that our children are being exposed to this stuff way before you think they're ready for it. And it's up to you to step in and make sure that they have the tools ready, because otherwise they're going to be left high and dry without a parachute, you know, without any kind of swimming, teaching, whatever you want to do. You know, the internet is one big pool, one big ocean, and they don't have a life vest, and they don't have a buoy, or they don't have swimming lessons, and they're going to drown if you don't get on top of it before they get there. Exactly. So, you know, that's our job as parents. And again, I've been, you know, I've got a 15-year-old, she's going through her own things and doing her own things in life. And all through this process, all through this journey, I've had, you know, a child, and so all of this stuff makes a lot more sense to me because of the fact that she was, you know, so young when I became a specialist child interviewer, and I was first introduced to protective behaviours education. And the minute I knew about protective behaviour, PBEs, I put it into force in my home, and then it's just continued from then on. I mean, I talk about this in my book, but, you know, at 8, she was exposed to someone telling her about sex at school, and it was, you know, the proper, you know, we'd had a really good, you know, protective behaviours, you know, period there from 3 till 8, but then someone's just thrown a spanner in the works and told her about sex. It's just because we had such great communication that I knew that something wasn't right. And she kept saying, I don't want to talk about sex. I don't want to talk about sex. And I was like, whoa, what do you know about sex? You know, thinking she wasn't ready, but someone in her school had told her. And this is where most kids learn stuff, at school. And, you know, it wasn't just, you know, a man and a woman fall in love and a baby's made. No, it was a penis in a vagina and stuff comes out the end of it, and that's how a baby's made. And, you know, I had a choice then to start giving her sex education, because I didn't want her to be left unawares and a potential target for a predator or predation. So and then, you know, at 10, which we used to be the average age of seeing pornography, now it's 8, she came to me and said, Mum, can you sit down? And when I said, what's wrong, thinking, oh, someone's touched her, you know, my mind went straight to the wrong, like the extreme end of the spectrum. Oh no, I was Googling sex and saw porn and it made me feel sick, you know, and we had a conversation about that. Then we, you know, and it just kept continuing where we could talk about these things. But imagine all the children that don't have that at home.
No, you're right.
How dangerous it is for them. It's just so dangerous.
It is. I was just, before we came on to do this, I was just on Facebook looking at David Gomez, Officer David Gomez's post. Yeah, he's brilliant. If you're not following him, everybody should follow him on Facebook. But he was saying, you know, parents, how many of you would let your child go to bed with a Playboy at night?
Yeah.
And then, well, how many of you let your child take their iPad to bed? And,
yeah.
You know, I personally would much rather a child have a Playboy than have a phone
I agree.
hooked into the Wi-Fi, because, and you know, when I talk in my parent workshops about pornography and say that I believe that we have to have the conversation by 6 at the latest, the parents are horrified, because it's not a case of if kids, it's when they see it, sort of thing.
It's also age appropriate. Like you can have an age appropriate conversation about it without, you know, going into the birds and bees just then. But yeah, you know, you got to talk about how there's going to be, you know, potentially seeing naked people and they look like they're fighting or wrestling or whatever.
And I call them private pictures and private movies.
Yeah.
But it's so important that we have this conversation, because, you know, when I say this to parents, they go back to their childhood and they think about the Playboy under Big Brother's bed or in Dad's cupboard, not realising the heinous acts that children are seeing. And because I get to stand in front of so many children, you know, they think Dad's doing that to Mum. You know, kids even, they don't have the words for flashbacks, but they say, Holly, that picture just keeps popping into my mind. And I keep thinking about it. And it's traumatizing them.
Yeah, so, I have that as well. I've had kids come to me during presentations where they're like, I can't stop seeing it. I can't sleep. And then, you know, we've discussed this as well. You know, you have kids that are having sleep regressions, or they're not able to sleep at night because they've seen something that has really upset them, but they don't have the words, or the one thing that they don't want to tell mum or dad because they're scared that mum and dad are going to take off their iPad or stop them from watching YouTube or whatever it is, or stop them from playing Roblox, whatever it is. So because of that fear, they're stuck in this traumatizing situation that is actually quite unhealthy for them. You know, I'm learning a lot about, you know, trauma on the brain, especially in early childhood. And yeah, it's just not, that's why we need to educate. We've got to stop thinking about our childhoods and how they worked and start realizing that the world changed 15, 20 years ago when the internet started. I mean, actually, when did we first get Facebook? I had my first Facebook around 2007. So that's when it changed. That's when it all changed. And most of our kids aren't, you know, my daughter was born in 2008. Most of these kids weren't even born then. So they've never known a world without this stuff.
Exactly. And that's what I say in my parent workshops. You know, don't use technology as a behavior management. You know, clean your room or I'll take your iPad. Stop fighting with your sister, I'll take your iPad. Because kids would rather you chop off their arm than take their iPad away. And it just sends it underground.
I know. And I mean, I've dealt with this in my own child. Like, I've got the one daughter, and you know, she's had like fits with me. We've had screaming matches about, you know, the fact that she wants an app and I wouldn't let her have it. You know, how dare I? Everyone else has got it. But recently she said to me whilst we were on a family holiday, she said, you know, Mum, I'm really glad now that you kept me away from social media until recently. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she's like, well, I just wasn't exposed to most of the stuff that everyone else was, and I kind of got a chance to grow up. And I sort of asked a bit more about it, and she was like, well, you know, when I was in year 6, I was still playing with My Little, like, not My Little Pony, like unicorns and Schleich horses, where all my friends were on TikTok, and I kind of was the oddball out, because I was like, come over, let's play with my horses. And they were like, hey, let's make a TikTok, when I went to their house. And she said, so even though I felt like I was left out, she goes, I now look back and say, well, I actually had a bit longer of a childhood. And she's 15 and she can realize that. Wow. So I know. And so, I mean, I know that a lot of us in this space and us trying to encourage parents to wait as long as possible. But I also know from my experience that you can have both. You can hold them off from some stuff, and you can allow them to use some stuff in a safe, supervised manner that gives them both the best of both worlds and keeps them safe in this. Like, I know it's possible because I've done it. And I also know that stuff still happens, whether you are the most protective parent in the world or you're you're not even watching what they're doing. You know, again, my daughter has had people come over and they've had devices and they've had games that she wasn't allowed, and they've shown them to her. But what I've been able to do is, because we had that open communication most of the time, she's told me about it. We've been able to discuss it. We've been able to go through it. We've been able to break it down and make her feel safe around it. And we've been able to move on from it, and it's not left any lasting problems. You know, our job is to parent. At the end of the day, our job is to parent. Yeah. I mean, look, we can be out their friends when they get older and they're wiser, but our job is to parent. And again, I've been reflecting on parenthood and what parenting means a lot, mainly because of my own daughter. Like, she's 15. It's a really tough age. I'm dealing with all of these issues that I didn't, you know, you don't get a manual on and you don't get warned about. And so I'm in the trenches with you guys, with parents and carers. And I just keep thinking, no, my job is to protect you. Number one job is to protect you. And I remind her that, and I can provide the necessities of life. When she used to whinge about not having, you know, some sort of app or game on her device, I'd be like, my job is to provide the necessities of life: water, food, shelter, love, education. If I do all of those things, then you don't need that app, you know. So she hated that, but you know, she's like, oh, Mum, like, why do you have to be so police? Like, you're such a police person. Everyone else's parents let them do everything. You know what? If we did everything they thought they wanted, then there would be anarchy. But but yeah, again, like, I just wrote everything I could think of in this book, starting from, you know, protecting them against people. Like, 90% of all child sexual abuse is someone known to them. I talk about, you know, the intimate child sex offender, which is someone in the family, an adult in the family, friend, you know, neighbor, someone in their community, someone known to them. I talk about peer-based abuse, which is now starting to become a topic of conversation. But, you know, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, we didn't talk about peer-based abuse. A lot of peer-based abuse or child-on-child abuse is done by a child in the home, you know, someone known to them or someone very close. So like a neighbor's child, a babysitter's child, you know, a friend from school. And that's report, you know, estimated to be about 50% of all child sexual abuse. And it's staggering to me that we're only just starting to talk about this, but it's very hidden. People don't want to talk about it because they don't want to admit that their child abused another child. But the problem with that is that whilst we're keeping everything secretive, neither child gets any help. Neither child gets the child that's, you know, perpetuating the abuse or you know, the one that's instigated the abuse. They're not getting the help they need to be able to grow up and be healthy and happy and safe. And the child that's being abused doesn't get the help to heal from that trauma. So we need to talk about that, and we need to be aware of it. Parents need to be aware of it. And then, of course, online, it's like never going away unless the internet blows up, where it's going to be here for as long as we are. And again, we got children. I think it's something like 9 out of 10 4-year-olds have their own device.
I know. How scary is that?
I know. And so if we've got 4-year-olds with their own device with access to the internet, you know, who knows if they're supervised or not. We've got, you know, 90% of all of our 4-year-olds with the potential to be looking at pornography, the potential to be groomed, the potential for anything. So we've really got to step up.
And they're not scared of it. That's it. You know, that's the thing. When I see small children, I'm sort of I'm still, you know, TikTok and all that sort of stuff, have no idea what I'm doing. And yet, you know, kids they know straight away.
They're Einsteins.
Yeah. You mentioned, because they're digital natives, you mentioned grooming. You know, I've helped some kids write a song about grooming because, again, I think grooming's something that we don't talk about enough.
Yeah.
And you know, that's why the foundation of protective behaviours or protective education, as I call it, is so good, because teaching kids about their early warning signs, and in our song we talk about the red flags.
Yeah.
So, you know, I know I need to write more resources around grooming for both adults, because you know, David Finkelhor, with his you know, the things that perpetrators need to abuse a child. First of all, they groom the parent. So we need to talk about all of this stuff.
Well, they need access to a child, don't they, to be able to groom a child and abuse a child. So they have to groom the parent first, or have some sort of relationship with that family, or be in that family for that to happen. If they don't have that access to that child, well, then the abuse doesn't happen. And I don't know how many families, or there's got to be like millions and millions of near misses, you know, with this stuff. You know, parents get a bit of an inkling that something's not right with the person, or they listen to their early warning signs. I had an incident with my own 15-year-old a couple of weeks ago, where she wanted to go on a like camping with a family, and I didn't know the family, and I didn't know I wasn't friends with the parents, and my daughter was wanting to go because she was invited. But all of my early warning signs, all of my gut instincts were, no, this is not a good idea. It was like over 100 kilometers away. And yes, she's 15, but she doesn't have a license. She doesn't have a way to get home. It was too far away. You know, I didn't know the family. I didn't know the parents. I didn't know the dad. I didn't know any, you know, I was just, everything was going off inside of me. And I just said and I felt bad that I was saying no. It was a big, like, conscience, like my conscience was feeling bad because my daughter was just so desperate to go off and do this with her friend. In the end, I just sat her down and I said, I'm sorry, but if I don't listen to my early warning signs and my gut, then what is the point of having it? And I said, and everything is pointing to no. And I know that this feels like I'm being really overprotective, but I have to listen to it. And I hope you understand that it's not because I said maybe in 2 more years when you've got your own license and your own car and you could drive home if something happened, or maybe if I knew the family better, or maybe, you know, all of these other conditions that were, you know, not the part of the reason. But I said at the end of the day, I've got to listen to my gut, and it says no.
I love that.
And I wasn't, and, you know, and I had to sit with it for a couple of days, and I was like, am I just being overreactive? Am I, you know, am I being too protective? Or, you know, I sat with it because it was a really hard decision for me. And, you know, and in the end, my daughter was like, that's okay, Mum. I understand where you're coming from. So, you know, that's, I guess in an adult version, that's exactly what we should be doing with our kids at all times.
Definitely.
Listening to, you know, having those conversations with them about, you know, why we don't, and encouraging them to listen to their bodies.
And not
you
just
know,
tell them because I said so. You know, that's one of the things I tell in my parent talk. Please don't ever say to your child, because I said so. Because that, you know, if you had said that to her, she'd go, oh, Mum, you're so mean. That's not fair. I'm going to ask Dad. Or she shuts down. But you opened up that conversation. And as you know, I've got a T-shirt that I wear all the time that's got listen to kids, believe kids, and trust your guts.
Yeah, it's exactly that.
At the end of the day. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm just hoping that, you know, and she was fine with it. And afterwards she said, you know what, kind of really just wanted to go because I was invited, not because I really wanted to go. And, you know, everything you pointed out to me makes sense. And, you know, so, you know, yeah, and that's the thing about all of this stuff is that we don't, you know, our one job is to protect our kids. Like if it's not us protecting them, then who is protecting them? No one else is protecting your kids but you. So if it's our one job, then we need to take it seriously, and we need to look at why we allow things. Is it because we're guilted into it by Nana and Pop or Grandma and Grandpa? You know, is it because, I mean, I'm a bit of a rule breaker. Obviously, I've joined the wrong job if I became a police officer. But since leaving the police, I'm a rule breaker. No, but I was always, I even had a conversation with my mother-in-law when she was a very young girl. My daughter was a very young girl, and said, look, I don't ever want you to leave her with any unknown males. I don't want you to ever have her, you know, because I knew the risks. I knew what we were risking with my daughter if she was left with someone I didn't know. Or if she was left with, you know, other children without supervision. I knew what we were risking, and I wasn't willing to risk it. And if that meant she couldn't go to something, then I would say no. And that my daughter hasn't missed out.
No.
So it's our job to protect our kids. And that's what, I mean, I talk about it in the book a lot. I talk about, you know, how you can do that and what to watch out for. I talk about grooming. You know, grooming happens not just in person, so in intimate child sexual abuse, it happens between children. Older children groom younger children. So scary to know that, but it is the truth. It happens in domestic violence relationships. People are groomed into relationships and love bombed. That's one of the first signs, one of the first things. And it happens in online child exploitation or you know, child sexual abuse online. So, you know, all of those instances, you know, is a form of grooming. There's grooming in all of them, and they're all the same type. They all happen the same way. There's, you know, 6 steps kind of, you know, like they sometimes alternate between what comes before the other, but they're all there. And if you're aware of them and your child's aware of them, then they're protected. You're protected. You know, it's not a fail safe, but it makes them so much safer.
Yeah. And we're both very clear that it is not children's jobs to keep themselves safe, because a lot of people, you know, want to shoot down protective education and say, oh, you're putting the onus on kids to keep themselves safe. We are very clear it is our job as adults. But for us, kids are the last line of defense. If you don't know what your private parts are called, how can you tell someone? So can you just reiterate how important it is? Because I'm still coming across children that don't know the correct anatomical names for their body parts.
I can tell you a story. Yeah. So quite a few times when a child sex offender or someone who's abused a child, or, you know, and they're someone from the own family, you know, they've used names to trick the children. They use game-like behaviors to trick the children into, you know, offending against them. Because, you know, again, I'll reiterate, children want to please adults. They want to please the people around them, whether that be an older child, a friend. an adult, they want to please people. So it's so easy for an adult or someone who's older than them to make them feel that by doing something for them will make them happy. And they can, and they, you know, and if a child knows that if a child has no idea that their penis, vagina, vulva, bum, breasts, whatever, places that aren't appropriate places to touch, and no one's allowed to look at them, then it makes it so much easier for someone who's preying on a child to go, oh, but we're just playing a game. You want to make me happy, don't you? Or, oh, you know, let me make you feel good. Like, I've spoken to numerous survivors and victims of child sexual abuse where, you know, it's been made out like they were doing something for them, or the offender was helping them, you know. And if a child's just wanting to make someone happy and it makes that person happy, it creates this like exchange where the child's making this person happy and the person's making them happy. And so there's this exchange. And the biggest problem we find, or not problem, but the biggest stress and struggle that survivors have is that in their very young minds, they enjoyed what happened. And then later on, when they realize it's abuse, there is this disconnect. They can't understand, how could they have let it happen? It was wrong. Why is it okay? Why did they enjoy it? And it's so traumatic. But it can all be stopped if we educate our children on anatomical correct names, that they have the right to feel safe at all times, that, you know, when they have their early warning signs, they need to tell a safe adult, you know, that they're not feeling safe, that, you know, it's not appropriate for anyone to touch them in their private places, where, you know, their bikini or bathers go, and that they're not allowed to touch anyone else. Such simple lessons that need to be reiterated over and over and over again for life almost. But, you know, and I believe protective behavior education is the start to sex education, consent education, you know, online safety education. Every part of education comes from protective behaviors education.
It's all the foundation. Yeah, perfect.
And if you have that at 3 and 4, when we like to see it being taught, I think it's the perfect time, because they know no different. You're creating this environment of safety. You're creating a family of safety where they can talk about anything, their feelings, their emotions. They become much more emotionally intelligent, and they're able to articulate things better. They're able to share things with you because you're listening to them, you know, as tough as it is. I tell you what, some of the conversations I've had with my daughter in the last few years are so tough because I didn't have any experience in that with my own childhood. It makes me, sometimes I go, oh, just stop. Let me like put my brain back in my ears because it's falling out. But, you know, and I just explain, you know, I'm struggling because I don't know what to do with this information, but I still love you. Keep telling me. I just need a moment before I die.
And you've had your experiences. So that's why I recommend your book.
Thank you.
Because I want parents to go out and buy this book. I'm going to put the link in the show notes and
yep,
wherever I can, because
great. Because
it's, you know, with all your experiences, you're still struggling. And I like the fact that you're so honest, because parents need to, if they don't know the answer to children's questions, they need to own that as well and say, look, you know, I'll come back to you tomorrow. Let's
go look it up. Yeah, let's look it up. Let's give me a moment. Let me think about this. You know, like, it's okay, because this is the thing.
They don't come with a book.
No, we don't come with a book, and every instance is different, and your background and your history and what you went through as a child, it will make your experience with your own child, like, it can add triggers and trauma, and it's just one good lovely I wanted to swear then. It's one amazing experience, but we have the choice to make it a good experience or a bad experience for our children. And I think it's really important. But yeah, go get my book, because I did put a lot of effort into it.
And yeah, I'm not just saying that because we're friends. I recommend it all the time because, you know, it's so well written. It's not a hard read. It's not, even though you do mention some cases and stuff, it's not traumatizing. It's not triggering. Can you just tell everybody, because I love the message that you received yesterday,
yeah.
from a lady that got it for a birthday.
Oh, it was very
Now, don't you cry, because I'll cry too.
I got very emotional because these types of messages are really what I do this for. I mean, I just, yeah. So it says, "Hi, Kristi. I just received your book as a birthday present. As a survivor of child sexual abuse myself, I am determined to protect my daughter and arm her with the knowledge, skills, and tools I wish I would have had when I was younger. Your content has been incredibly valuable to me and my partner, and I just wanted to reach out and thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything you have done and continue to do through spreading awareness and arming people with this knowledge."
I know, when I read it yesterday, I was,
I know. Honestly, I didn't know what post-policing would be like. I had no idea. I just left to save my mental health and to save my family and everything. But knowing that we, all of us in this space can hopefully prevent children from going through what I saw kids go through, that's all I care about now. I just want kids to not go through that, as many children as possible, wherever possible. Unfortunately, bad things happen all the time, but why wouldn't we try and stop it if we could?
Beautiful. Those are beautiful words to end on. Kristi, look, thank you so much for giving me your time. I really hope people rush out and buy this book, because it needs to be in every home.
Thanks, Holly.